Good evening and welcome to Quorum. This is our 34th season of providing you a direct link to your state legislators. I'm Stephen Caranda. The slowing economy and millions of dollars in state budget cuts are having an impact on Mississippi's institutions of higher learning. Several university presidents have taken steps to save money by reducing classes and majors, as well as delaying repairs and maintenance. What is the state of higher education in Mississippi, and how will legislators help colleges and universities weather this funding crisis? Tonight, leaders of the Senate and House Universities and Colleges Committee are here to answer those questions and more. We welcome back to the program Senator Briggs Hopson, who's a member of the Universities and Colleges Committee. He's from Vicksburg and represents District 23 in Issaquena, Warren, and Yazoo counties. Senator Hopson is serving his second year in the legislature. From the House, we have Representative Kelvin, the Vice Chairman of the House Universities and Colleges Committee. Representative Buck is from Holly Springs and represents District 5 in Benton and Marshall counties. He's serving his fifth year in the legislature. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Glad to be
Great
here.
to be here, man.
For 34 years, your phone calls have been an important part of the program. The toll-free number from anywhere in Mississippi is 1-877-405-5247. That's 1-877-405-5247. You may begin calling us with your questions for our guests. For those of you on the internet, you can email your questions to quorum@mpbonline.org. Also, tonight's Quorum program is being simulcast on MPB radio. I'd also like to note we just have two guests tonight because the other members of the committee were not able to make it. And I'd also like to add that for those of you on Twitter, you can follow MPB by going to our website, mpbonline.org, and we'll be taking questions from Twitter tonight as well. I'd like to start with something that happened today in the House. House members passed a resolution to accept more than $50 million in funding from the federal stimulus package for unemployment dollars, something the governor has said he wouldn't want to do. Representative Buck, there were several hours of debate. What made this such a contentious issue among House members?
Well, the members of the House, and I think they represent a fair majority of the citizens of this state, feel that the state of Mississippi is simply not in a position to say that we're not prepared to look at accepting federal dollars that might be helpful in terms of restoring our economy to where it needs to be. And so the debate centered around that very fact that being a state that ranks 50th in so many categories relating to quality of life, that we have if we have this opportunity now to accept these dollars that might go towards, and this one in particular happens to do with employment securities dollars for people who have been laid off, who were working, and for some reason the company closed down, the industry shut down, and so they don't have a job now, and they're trying to provide for their family still. And so we felt very strongly that these dollars could be very instrumental in helping them at least weather the storm that we're in now as it relates to this economy. And so our measure today, which was actually House Concurrent Resolution number 64, simply says that if possible, the state legislature, at least the House of Representatives, using a provision that's in the federal law, will accept this money and use it to make sure that we can try to bridge the gap and make things a little bit better for our citizens.
There has already been accepted a $25 increase to unemployment payments per week, I believe, from the stimulus package. The governor has argued that this would require a change in Mississippi law and that it would require the state to give unemployment to people who don't work full-time, which currently is not included in the law. What do House members think of that? Would they like to see those types of people included?
Well, listen, many people are working part-time jobs because they simply can't find full-time employment. And if that's better than sitting at home and just doing nothing, in my opinion. And many people work 2 or 3 full-time or part-time jobs. And so we don't think they ought to be penalized simply because we have an economy that won't support full-time employment or businesses or jobs that won't give, like other benefits that could be important. So the position that the House has is simple. We think whatever dollars that we can get and receive from the federal government that will help in our current employment environment and our job environment, we ought to be prepared to accept. And we ought to be able to use that money in the way that's prescribed by the law. But now keep this in mind. If at the point when the money runs out, we can't continue. We have to do and cut budgets every year. In fact, the governor this year had to do some major cuts in our budget simply because the money was not there. And if the money is not there, we do like we always do. We have to try to make do with what we have. And so, no law can make us spend money that we don't have. We have a constitutional requirement to balance the budget every year, and we'll have to do that with the taxpayers' money.
Now, this Senator Hopson, the lieutenant governor has already said he's opposed to this issue, so would likely face a tough fight in the Senate. Being a member of the Republican Party, what have you been hearing from other Republican senators and senators in general about this?
Sure. I don't think there's much of a chance this is going to get through the Senate. As you know, the governor has said that he's not going to accept the money. The lieutenant governor has said that he's not in favor of accepting the money. And the reason that we don't want to accept the money is because it may, in 2 or 3 years down the road, it's going to put us in a situation where we have to fund these persons on unemployment rolls that we're presently not paying for, and our budget is tight enough every year as it is, as Representative Buck alluded to. We're struggling right now in Mississippi to fund basic programs and basic needs in our state, and we're cutting, as we're going to talk about tonight, I'm sure we're cutting so many programs. The thing that we don't want to do is put ourselves into a bind with monies that we take now that are going to help us for 2 years and are going to turn our budget upside down thereafter, and I frankly just don't see it passing the Senate.
And really looking at, as you were saying, the long-term implications of what this would be.
Correct. And the stimulus package has some very good parts. I think all of us in the legislature would agree that things that can help us pay for education, money that helps us pay for road and bridge construction, and that's a great part of the stimulus package, I think, helping to pay for Medicaid, and we've got a budget crunch. As Representative Buck knows, we've got a huge budget crunch on Medicaid every year. Those kind of things are going to help us out. The worst thing we can do, I think, is put ourselves in a position of starting a program that we're not going to be able to fund in the foreseeable future. It may help us temporarily, but I'm afraid in the long run it's going to put us into a bind.
Yeah, and I think some people might not know, this isn't an all-or-nothing proposition, is it? We're obviously accepting a lot of this money, aren't we?
That's correct. We can accept portions, and as the governor has, I think, stated that he intends to do, he's going to accept all but the unemployment benefits, and I think that's what he's going to do.
Representative Buck, was this vote pretty much down party lines from your perspective?
Well, yes, it may have been down party lines, but let me just respond in this way. The governor has his position on issues, and quite frankly, that's the way it's supposed to be. He can have his position on this, and so can the Senate, and the Senate can do what they want to do as it relates to how the lieutenant governor wants to do this. But as for the House, the people of Mississippi need to understand one thing, that the House of Representatives sees this as an issue that relates directly to people, and it's a people issue that has nothing to do with politics, and it's one that we feel very strongly about, that in any situation, we're in a time now that is unprecedented. We're in a time where we don't know exactly what might happen 2 or 3 years down the road, but what we do know is right now people are suffering, and when you put this money back into people's hands, and it's not a whole lot of money. Let's keep that in mind. We're not talking about a lot of money on this thing. We're talking about a little bit of money to try to help them tide over. And when they get this money, what they're going to do is basically spend it and put it back into our economy. And in long term, in the short term, we'll be able to see some of the benefits of them spending this money. That's what stimulus money is all about, spending so that things can begin to move again.
Another thing that happened in the legislature in the last couple of days was a deadline killed some high-profile legislation, including voter ID legislation. This happened in the Senate. I believe this isn't a committee that you're on, but some senators blocked voter ID legislation from coming out of a committee. Were you surprised to see that?
I was frankly surprised. I think a lot of people were surprised. It was, I think, fairly well understood amongst senators that that bill would come out of committee and we'd be taking it to conference in the near future to discuss voter ID. As most of you know, the Senate has had the position that we want voter ID. We want to make sure people can show some kind of identification when they come to vote. I know the House has been in favor of early voting provisions, and I think the compromise that some had talked about was that the Senate would be willing to give in on early voting while the House may give in on voter identification. I'm not speaking for every House member or every Senate member, and I think for many it was a surprising vote yesterday when the Senate Elections Committee didn't bring it out of committee.
And that was cited, the early voting and satellite voting locations, as well as extended registration. What are your thoughts on those? What have you been hearing about why there might have been some objection?
Well, I think some people want a straight voter identification bill. And what I mean by straight voter identification bill is every person, regardless of age, would have to show some form of voter identification. It could be a driver's license. It could be a voter ID card that they get from the Secretary of State. It could be some receipts that they have along with photo identification of some other military or some other means. I think people had a hang-up with the early voting. There are concerns in the circuit clerk's offices about how they're going to monitor early voting. Right now in Mississippi, we have a form of early voting with absentee balloting. People can go in and say that they're not going to be there for Election Day, and they can cast an early vote. I think there were enough people that were willing to give in on things they didn't like to have the things that they might want, and maybe we could have gotten some kind of voter ID bill. Now there's discussion about a referendum. There's discussion about trying to do some other things, and I don't know what's going to happen. But yes, I was surprised and frankly dismayed that we didn't get some kind of bill out of the committee.
And Representative Buck, this is something that passed the House this session, but in the past hasn't. What were some of the things that House members added? We talked about the early voting as well as registration. What are you hearing from House members about this bill now that it's done?
Well, to quote one of our members in the House, he said voter ID is a solution looking for a problem. And I tend to agree with him. I don't think that we really have an issue with voter ID, and I've said this over and over. We just had major elections in this country, and Mississippi was a part of that election, and there was not one thing that happened in that election that voter ID, in my opinion, would have resolved. And so, first of all, my position would be that voter ID is not something that we really had to deal with at this point in time at all. But with that said, the House did find a way to find some compromise, and voter early voting and same-day registration, and even we had some suffrage language in the bill as well to deal with that. We did try to send the bill over to the Senate, and of course some of the people in the Senate, some of the members who wanted an all or nothing approach in committee, I think, decided that they would rather kill the bill than have the bill pass. And why they did that, you know, there are many people speculating as to what that might be, but the end result is we don't have a bill today because of that.
I wanted to obviously talk about universities and colleges, which is why we're all here tonight, and we have a caller touching on that issue. Roy from Hattiesburg, go ahead with your question. Roy, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. Hello? I'm the president of the College Democrats here at the University of Southern Mississippi.
Yes, go ahead.
And we are watching you, and our question is, why, when there is budget cuts?
I think we're having some problems with Roy's call here. I believe what they were going to probably touch on was the budget cuts that we've been looking at. This has been a tight legislative budget session. What have we been seeing in the universities and colleges as far as budget cuts go?
Well, we've been struggling to try to find ways to make ends meet with this budget in all phases. And one of the things that the House has proposed is to try to put a few more dollars in the general fund. And one way we've proposed doing that is by passing a tax on cigarettes, increasing that amount. And we found that the monies that we could get in that could be put into the general budget to help us with some of the problems that we have with our universities and colleges. Every effort is going to be made as far as the House is concerned to at least maintain the level of funding that we had in 09. And so that's pretty much the position. I would add that we're also looking at the stimulus money as a means to try to make some ends meet with this process as well. We think and we know that that's one-time money, but of course we feel like this economy won't be like this always. We'll begin to see growth at some point, and at that point we'll be able to find more dollars to put into higher ed. But we are, as a House of Representatives, committed, and I think the Senate is just as committed to trying to make sure that we give every dollar we possibly can to institutions of higher learning, because after all, they are too an economic driver in this state.
And as Representative Buck mentioned, I'm sure senators are taking this issue very seriously, aren't they?
They are. You know, one of the things that we all agree on is we need to do everything we can to fund every level of education, K through 12, community colleges and universities and colleges. We've got great needs in education in Mississippi, and we're historically we've been at the bottom part of the nation in funding and in the way that we treat our education system. We need to do a better job of making sure that they have the tools that they require to perform and to offer good programs at the universities and colleges. The stimulus money, I think, is going to help out. There are a couple things in the stimulus bill that I think will be real beneficial. One is that there are millions of dollars that are going to be put into Pell Grants. This is going to help a lot of low and moderate income students attend college. Another thing that it does, it has money dedicated to low and moderate income students who are working their way through college. So there are tuition assistance programs for those persons who are trying to work. We know that tuition has increased dramatically over the years. Unfortunately, it's just a numbers game for us, and we all agree, House and Senate, it is hard to fund all of the programs that we've got. And there's so many worthy causes and so many needs in our state. And we took I think the Senate Appropriations position was a $21 million cut for universities and colleges this year. I'm hoping that we're going to have no cut because the stimulus money is going to come in take care of that. But it is a difficult time, and when you don't have a lot of money coming in through tax revenues and income tax in the state, you've got to find ways to tighten your belt.
Let's try to get another caller in this. Hopefully the phones are working better this time. Roy from Hattiesburg, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is why is higher education always the first thing cut when there's a budget crisis?
That's a concern among some people, but most departments and agencies were cut, weren't they, Representative Buck? This wasn't the only thing.
Well, if you remember, the governor had to cut in his executive order because of some constitutional requirements, and he had to cut every budget, and I think it was about a 5% cut across the board in most agencies. But for some of us, education is absolutely a priority, and we try to make sure that with our dollars that we have, that the people have entrusted us with, that we try to prioritize that in a way that we can get the most return from it. And nothing, I think, returns better than investing in education at all levels, K through 12, as the Senator has indicated. And so in response to the caller's question, it is not the position of the House or the Senate, I don't think, to make education in higher institutions of learning the first area of cut. We just have to try to deal with the dollars that we have. And now one key to this is trying to find revenue. And I think nothing would help universities and colleges more than finding a steady and reliable source of funding each and every year. That's what they're asking us for. And there are many of us in the House who would love to find that solution, and we think there are ways that this can be done, but it, of course, will take bipartisan support. It'll take the support of the governor and others. But finding a reliable source so there won't be all this speculation from year to year about what we're going to do for our colleges and universities. Keep in mind, when we don't do that, tuition does rise. And those who would argue that, raising revenue or raising some revenue through some kind of a tax is the wrong way to go, you end up costing families dollars anyway that would be the equivalent of a tax by having to pay more tuition when they go to college.
Senator Hopson, would members of the Senate, you think, be looking at the issue of possibly earmarking something for higher education as a way to keep steady funding for it?
I don't think so. I don't think that's a solution for funding higher education. Let me respond to one other thing on Roy's question. I think Representative Buck is correct about us trying to find ways, any way that we can, to fund all levels of education. And universities and colleges are not the first. Trust me, they're not the first ones to get cut. And if you look at some of the budget cuts that have been proposed this year, you can see some that have taken far more drastic hits than universities and colleges. Again, unfortunately, when we don't have the revenues coming in, we've got to find ways to spread the money around to the different agencies that have needs. I don't think that earmarks are necessarily the way to go to fund education. I mean, they may can help out in some areas, but I just think we need to be able to find ways to get general fund dollars, and the way to do that is that you increase your tax revenue, and that's by creating jobs. So you've got more people that are making money, you've got more people spending money, that increases your sales tax revenue, and thereby the state gets more money in, and they can fund more agencies and more programs like our universities and colleges, which we need to be funding appropriately.
We were just talking about, of course, the cuts. Some colleges, including Alcorn, has cut classes. Jackson State is asking employees to take days off. Representative Buck, how concerned are you when the universities are cutting back in these types of areas?
This is a major concern to all of us, I think, and it just shows how desperate we are as it relates to this economy and the dollars that we have to try to find solutions so that this doesn't have to happen. We think that stimulus, again, will be a good part of helping us with this problem. But, I just see no reason why we can't do something that would prevent this from ever happening when it comes to our universities and colleges. Now, we do have a lot of budgets that we have to try to fund, and there's no question about that. Everybody feels that their budget is very important, and of course, if we offer this as a state service or agency, then, we feel that they're important as well. But when it comes to our K through 12 and our universities and colleges and our junior colleges and community colleges, we really have to understand the important and the vital role that they play in our economy in terms of providing people with jobs. We're looking at about $400 million, I guess, roughly, as it relates to our institutions of higher learning and general support. That's not including the University Medical Center and some other areas, but I think we're going to find a way to get them to at least the funding that they were the previous year. And hopefully, if we can get this economy turned around, we can begin to try to steadily continue to increase that so that tuition won't have to be such a burden on some of our citizens.
And Senator Hopson, there are these cuts going on at the universities. They're cutting back on classes, cutting back on faculty, including, I believe, your graduating university, the University of Mississippi, one of those universities. How are you concerned about what's happening to these colleges?
Obviously, it's disappointing that students can't take the classes they need to take or want to take. We're as concerned here in Jackson as they are on the university. At the universities, we're concerned like the citizens of Mississippi. It's very disheartening. The question is, what do you do about it? We've got a few options. One is we've got to basically rob Peter to pay Paul. In other words, we've got to take money from some other agencies that are worthwhile. Another option is raise tuition. No one wants to see that done because that prevents some students from going to the universities. Although I will say that there are some senators and representatives that feel like if we've got to make a cut in some area of education, that universities and community colleges can handle it better because they may be able to increase their tuition. That's not a great way to look at it because, again, you hurt some students that need to go to those schools. But what do? You do your best to fund them. You hope that they're tightening their belts as much as they can. And we don't govern, we in the legislature do not govern the universities and colleges. The Institutions of Higher Learning Board is the one that governs them to make sure that they're offering the programs they need to offer and doing the things they need to do. We count on them to make sure that they're running a tight ship.
Let's bring another caller into this. I hope I've got the name right. Gloria from Batesville. Go ahead with your question.
Yes. We need that money, that similar money for the schools and education, and I also they need to give it to the unemployment because our light bill's running $400 and some dollars a month for the last 4 months. That don't make no sense because we're paying surcharge and everything else. And if you on a fixed income or you laid off, how can you feed your family?
Thank you for the call, Gloria. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of people like that with those types of concerns, haven't you, Representative Buck?
We have, and we certainly understand the predicament that so many people in our state are in. We're looking at a state that is probably hit a lot harder than many other states simply because we've always had the struggle of trying to make sure, being one of the poor states in the Union, trying to make ends meet with some of our citizens. One of the things I would say to anyone is that you need to, from time to time, get in touch with your representative and your senator and let them understand directly how you feel about some of these issues. And I think the stimulus money and this resolution that the House has passed is an important piece of legislation. It may be symbolic to some degree in nature simply because at this point we'll still have to have some enabling legislation to make some of these things happen. But the message is very clear. People are hurting and they need some kind of relief. The federal government has offered some federal relief, and so we need to try to do what we can. Now, as it relates to our budgets, there is a way to deal with some of this. People have to be prepared to understand one thing. If we want to continue to provide the kind of services that we have been providing, they are getting more and more expensive. And that means that there will have to be revenue to try to meet those demands. If you don't meet them, you'll pay on the other end. When people have to find ways to get to college or can't go to college, then they end up not going to college. And then you end up paying in the long run anyway because they are not as productive. They don't make as much money. So if they're not making as much money, then they can't put as much money into the coffers of the state. And so we just find that you just have to be a little bit more visionary in your approach when you're dealing with these kinds of things.
And Senator Hopson, I'm sure people like Gloria have also been voicing their concerns to senators. I'm sure you take them very seriously, don't you?
Of course. We value every constituent's concerns, and no matter how small or no matter how big it is, we value what your opinions are, and we certainly try to do everything we can. Sometimes we're put into those awkward situations where you have one group of constituents that says, we want you to push for this, and the other group says they want you to push for something that's exactly the opposite. And you have to use your best judgment, and you have to use what you think the majority of your constituents think is appropriate. These are truly difficult times, as Representative Buck said, and there's no easy solution to this. I think the best solution is for us to incentivize our businesses, incentivize our workers, give them the tools that they need to be productive. And again, it goes back to creating jobs, creating wealth that increases our tax revenues. In turn, that increases our state coffers. In turn, that allows us to fund the programs that we need to fund and fund them adequately.
We've got a question from Twitter here that I hope I'm reading correctly. Where are the committee members on the Peers Committee suggestion for the IHL funding formula? If I'm understanding correctly, the Peer Committee has been looking at possibly, is it smaller increases every year but then steady increases? Is that what they're considering?
Well, the Peer Committee has suggested a couple of things, and they've done this based on the fact that the current formula that has recently been adopted is so much different from the past formula. And what it has resulted in is that some of our institutions are getting the short end of this deal. And in this last round, I think it was only one university in the entire state that got an increase in the dollars. The rest of them had some loss based on the formula. And the formula takes into consideration weighted classes, and it takes into consideration, the number of full-time equivalent students and things of that nature. And it is, according to the Peer Committee and some of us, we really need to revisit that formula or at least have IHL revisit that formula and come up with a formula that's more equitable. And so that is, I guess, the real issue here. Can we come up with a formula that will be fair to some of these institutions that are obviously going to lose? And I saw some projections for some of our universities. They're going to be considerable losses for them based on this formula if we don't make some changes.
And Senator Hopson, I'm sure, has the Senate committee been looking into this issue also of how the different universities are funded compared to each other?
We've heard some complaints about it, and we've looked into it. Now, the formula that we're talking about, for those that don't know, is the IHL formula, and they've set that up, and this is kind of a real...
a crash course?
Crash course, yeah, a real simple course. It's more complicated than what I'm going to tell you, but it takes into account the programs that are offered by the universities and the cost of offering those programs. It also looks at physical plant operations, and it's got an adjustment factor in there for small schools, and those, unfortunately, are the ones in this last round of allocations that were hurt. Previously, you had some of the larger universities saying they were getting hurt because they weren't getting the same amount of money per student that some of the smaller universities would get. And it's, again, one of those situations where you get one group that says, we're not getting funded at the level that the small schools are getting funded, and then when you fund them at that level, then the small schools are left behind. So there's no easy solution, and both sides are saying that they're getting ripped off when you fund it the opposite way. And that's we're not, at this point, I don't think the Senate's prepared to interfere with the IHL funding formula, but it is something we're going to be looking at, I'm sure, closely over the next couple of years.
We've got another caller, Mona from Jackson. Go ahead with your question.
Yes.
Go ahead with your question, Mona.
Hello. I have several questions, but one of them is the unemployment benefit that the federal government is offering.
Yes, go ahead.
Why is it that Kathy Barber is saying that we're going to have to increase taxes? If we don't have the funds in the future in 2 years prior, then we will have to drop back with the benefits. I don't understand why he's trying to tie in tax increases with a federal giveaway program.
Thanks for the call, Mona. Mona is thinking along what I've heard some other people saying, couldn't we, after a couple of years, change our law or do something? Is that something House members have been looking at to try to avoid possibly what the governor is saying could happen?
Well, I think there's always, we know that unless there's a constitutional conflict here, that we can always go into the statute and make some adjustments to make sure that we don't put a burden on the taxpayers that we can't afford to deal with. I think that, to be honest with you, I think that the governor's position is kind of an alarmist kind of a position, in that he's bringing up something that is really not an issue at this time, and that when you think about this employment securities, these dollars, a couple of years back, this state and the House supported it, the Senate supported it. We reduced the employment securities tax on businesses, on industry. We reduced that. And then we established what we called a workforce training dollars, which would be used to help train people in terms of getting new jobs and being more prepared. Well, what that says is we've had a very prudent and reasonable approach to the employment securities tax in the way we deal with that. There is no way that we're going to turn that all around and overburden our businesses and industry because we're going to, with this stimulus money. This stimulus money is simple. It's just like the Katrina money. It's going to get us through this crisis, and that's what we understand. That's what the House understands. We think that everybody should understand that it may not be something that we can permanently do, and we shouldn't have to, based on the fact that we can anticipate that our economy will grow and that we won't be in this kind of a economic stress situation much, for forever. It just won't happen.
Senator Hopson, I wanted to get your response, but I also wanted to touch on something that I haven't talked about yet tonight. This fund that pays for unemployment also pays for job training, other types of benefits, and there's some concern that if that gets too low, they would have to cut those off, isn't there?
That's correct. We've got a trust fund, essentially, that's set up for unemployment benefits, and we've got a law that requires us to keep that fund at a certain level. To use simple math, and I'm just giving you numbers to make it easy to figure out, we may take the $50 million this year. If we took that $50 million, that's going to help us out for a couple of years. The problem is it may cost us $150 on the back end because we're going to be funding a group of persons that presently are not getting unemployment benefits. If, in fact, what I've been told about the stimulus package, and I haven't read the full 1,500-page stimulus bill, but if it's what I've been told is true, we're going to be put in a situation where for us to accept that money, we're going to have to accept the stipulations that the federal government gives us. Those stipulations are, in the long run, going to end up costing us more money. Now, if somebody can show me that's not the case, I'm all for it. But if they tell us we're going to accept 50 and we're going to have to turn around and pay back 150 in a few years, I don't think our state can handle it. Then we're really going to be looking at cuts in education and trying to find a way to fund Medicaid and trying to find a way to keep programs alive. I'd love to be told I'm wrong about it, but I'll just have to see some information that tells me that before I can change the way I feel about this.
Let's bring another caller into this. Rick from Pascagoula, go ahead with your question.
I was wondering why, if these legislation and all, if they're really looking at these colleges to see what programs are funding in these colleges and stuff. It's like, I know that you can go to Mississippi State to be an electrical engineer. You can also go to Ole Miss. But I don't understand why these colleges are duplicating each other on the curriculum they teach you. You know what I'm saying? Like you'd have a school of medicine, Ole Miss. Why would you have a school of medicine at Southern?
Thanks for the call, Rick. Rick's got some concerns that we're duplicating programs. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, Rick. And I tell you, when we confirmed the new members of the IHL last year in the Senate, that's one question I asked all 4 of the prospective new members, and that is that they would please take a look at duplicative programs. Now, I want you to understand one thing. Just because there's an education program at Mississippi State, let's say, I'm not sure if that means we need to cut out all other education programs in the state, because I think some other universities do a good job of offering education for people in their areas. Some people don't want to drive from Natchez to Oxford or from Tupelo to Hattiesburg to go to their university. So I know that we have to keep some programs regionally diverse so we make sure that people have the chance to go to a university as close by as possible. But I was very concerned about duplicative programs, and I think that's a big waste. I think there's some monies that we can cut by cutting out a program at universities that may be nearby each other and moving them, shifting them to another university where they can get a better bang for their buck. If you've got one teacher that can handle it for a bigger group of students, that may save us a lot of money. So, yes, I've requested the institutions of higher learning to take a look at that, and I hope they'll continue to do it so we can streamline our universities and colleges in Mississippi and hopefully have a better program at the universities that still have those that offer that field, whatever it is, engineering, education, etc., and save some money in the process.
Representative Buck, are there ways to create some efficiency here, you think?
Well, there's always a way to look at the way you operate our institutions for higher learning and education in general. But you do have to keep in mind that the demand is what's usually driving the number of courses. And, of course, as the Senator has indicated, people who live in North Mississippi aren't wanting to drive all the way down to South Mississippi and Hattiesburg if they can get a course in that area. And in this day and time, you have to keep in mind many people that are going to school now are also working and trying to get an education at the same time. So proximity to courses and things is very important to them. And so we have to be careful as we go through this process of streamlining or trying to break down on some of the redundancy in our school systems. We have to be very careful that we don't, in the process, make it more difficult for our citizens to get that education that they're looking for and that extra training that they need.
We talked about this a little bit, about the possibility of raising tuition at these universities. It's been happening for, of course, the last several years. What are your concerns about how much stress this is putting on Mississippi's families who want to attend these colleges?
Well, you know, that's it. That's an excellent question, and the reason it is such an excellent question is because as we go through this process, everybody has come to the same conclusion that the more educated your population is, the better off they will do. The better off they do, the more they can put back into what we call our economy. The more they can put back into what we call our coffers as relates to the state government and operation. And so with that said, you know, making sure that they are able to afford it. And that's why I'm kind of pleased about the stimulus package, because as the Senator alluded to, there's some provisions in there for Pell Grant. I know that the House is going to be looking at some MTAG money to try to make sure that students get a little more help. But the bottom line is getting more of our citizens to gain a college education, whether it begins at the junior college level or the the 4-year college, is very important. And so, when it comes to making sure that we have the funding, we need to do that, and we need to do it in such a way that we're just not transferring it because we don't raise revenue at the state level. We're not transferring that to tuition cost. And tuition cost is the main thing that can prevent people who would go to college and become more productive from going.
And Senator Hopson, is it a tough balancing act looking at the funding issue but also wanting to keep college accessible for people?
It is. I looked at some numbers the other day about funding universities and colleges, and surely this year, without the stimulus money, there would have been cuts in the universities and colleges. I looked at what we funded the universities and colleges over the last 7 years, and there's been a pretty substantial increase. I think it's $220 million thereabouts that have been added to universities and colleges. But with the cost of providing programs, the cost of good teachers, and as our universities try to improve themselves, those costs have risen above what we've been able to fund universities. So the net effect is we've actually had, when you add inflation in, we've not funded universities as well as the amount of money that they've needed for their to offer the program. So it's a great concern, even though a lot of money's been put into universities and colleges. The last thing we want to do is to have to raise tuition for students, because I agree with Representative Buck. We need to make colleges and universities as affordable as possible. And the good thing is, I think we are fairly affordable compared to other universities and colleges in the Southeast. You're still getting a good bang for your buck in Mississippi, but I'm scared that if we start going too high, we're going to lose some good students, and I agree wholeheartedly with Representative Buck. The more we get educated, the better off our citizenry is going to be, the more money that's going to be put back into our economy, and the better our state will be.
We've got an email that touches on this issue. John writes, why not apply stimulus money to projects and expenses such as repairs or upgrades, which will allow colleges to hold costs down? We talked a little bit about what the stimulus package will be doing, but is that sort of an angle a possibility?
It really is. We received a request from our universities and colleges in terms of bonding. And the bonding money was going to be used to kind of do some of the renovation, repairs, capital improvements on the university campuses that they really need. It was really a fraction of what they really needed, but it amounted to about $240 million in terms of upkeep, maintenance, and some other things that they wanted to do to improve their campuses. And so, with those kind of requests, there's clearly a demand and a need for these stimulus dollars to come in and try to offset. There's no way that our budget could handle that entire amount of money. We just simply can't do it. But so what we will have to do is combine what we can do at the state level with the federal stimulus dollars that are outlined and can be used for some of these purposes. We need to use that, and I hope we will. I hope we'll take full advantage of that. I hope once the money is received that they use it and use sound judgment and prioritize it so that they can get the most out of it.
Senator Hopson was talking a few minutes ago about some of the stimulus dollars which will be going to student aid, for example, Pell Grants. Mm-hmm. Will the money that can go for maybe infrastructure at universities, will that be general fund dollars that will then be put to the universities, or is there money in the stimulus package that goes specifically to those types of things?
If I'm not mistaken, I think there's money that can be used in both areas. I think there's money that can be used for, and there's some language in there that outlines exactly what the parameters are as it relates to how it can be used, but there are dollars that are there to do some things that relate to physical plant and stuff of that nature. There's also the money that will be used that go directly to individuals, which is Pell Grants and some other kind of funds and dollars. Workforce, I think they call it work study program, something of that nature.
And Senator Hopson, in the Universities and Colleges Committee in the Senate, you're probably watching this pretty closely, aren't you?
We are. One part of the stimulus package is what they call a Fiscal Stabilization Fund, and that's going to allow education, it's going to allow K through 12, community colleges and IHL to have some monies to help with their fiscal plans, as Representative Buck was discussing. And I think that's good. Particularly, I know we've got schools around our state, and this is not just for universities and colleges. I know there are K through 12 schools that need some help with their infrastructure, need some help with buildings. Those monies will be, I think, they're needed desperately, and hopefully that's going to help. It's going to do two things. One, it's going to help improve our education shortcomings in the state, and the second thing is hopefully it's going to put some people to work that are doing the construction jobs, and that'll help circulate some money in the economy. So I'm hopeful. I'm not sure how much of it. I haven't seen anything yet that tells us how much of it can go to universities and colleges, but I hope there's some portion that does go to our universities and colleges to help them with some fiscal plan needs.
We've got another call that I wanted to bring on to this show. Amy from Jackson, go ahead with your question.
Yes. This is Amy Whitten. I'm actually in Oxford, and I'm the current president of the Institutions of Higher Learning Board.
Well, thanks for joining us, Ms. Whitten.
Well, more than a question, what I would really like to do is comment on the exceptional preparation and the commitment that both of your guests tonight have. We worked very closely with Senator Hopson. We've worked very closely with Vice Chairman Buck. And, you know, I think what you're seeing tonight on your show is really a level of preparation that's beyond what I've seen since I've been on the board for dealing with the issues that we have, for being committed strategic partners to what we're trying to do in higher education, and also, quite frankly, for really helping us to hold this system accountable. And I really didn't have a question. I'm simply a listener and a watcher who's viewing this from home, and I just want to thank both of these gentlemen who are probably into hour 13 or 14 of their day today for being such committed partners to higher education, for understanding it and preparing it the way they have.
Well, thank you for the call, Ms. Whitten. I'm sure this is a pretty tight relationship, isn't it, working with the board and the legislature?
Well, it has to be. We have to be responsible on our end to try to do what we can when it comes to funding. They have to be responsible as it relates to the operations of our universities to ensure that they provide the best possible education that we can provide in this state. They're great universities, all of them, and it's because of the teamwork that both the IHL board and I think our legislation and even our executive branch has work to do to make that possible.
Senator Hopson?
Well, let me tell you something. I was glad to hear from Ms. Whitten. She's a fantastic leader, and I'm not just saying this because she called in and complimented us, but she's a fantastic leader of the IHL, and that board is as good as any board you'll see in any state agency probably in the country. The people that are on that board are fantastic. They're all very knowledgeable. They care deeply about our universities and colleges, and they do everything they can to make that board and the universities and colleges the best they can be. So, look, if anybody wants to know if there's a top flight group of people on IHL, you've got them. I'll be the first one to tell you it's a fantastic group, and I know they're doing everything they can to make our state and our universities and colleges the best they can be.
One thing I wanted to touch on, you were talking earlier, Representative Buck, about maybe earmarking some money or having a specific set of dollars that come in that go to universities every year. Do you think now with the tight budget, is this a good time to try to revamp the way that we fund universities and colleges, or should that maybe wait until there's better finances for the state?
Well, you know, there are two ways of looking at that. And, of course, you know, if you ask me, I think we need to really look at the possibility of coming up with a stable, reliable, insurable source of money for these universities and colleges, our community colleges, right now. I mean, we may not be able to put all the dollars there right now, but we need to be trying to devise a way and be committed to a way of making sure that we have at least, you know, a threshold that we are shooting for when it comes to making sure that our universities have the funding they need. It is so unpredictable right now when it comes, and when you hear about presidents having to lay off and do all of these kinds of things. This is not just because of, this is not the first time they've been faced with that kind of a dilemma. they've been faced with this before. This happens to be highlighted because of how stressful this economy is. But this is something that they face yearly in terms of being able to meet the needs of their different universities and trying to maintain solid staff and faculty. It really is a dilemma, and I think if we could come up with some method of having a more reliable and steady flow of revenue, we'd do a lot to help our universities and colleges.
Senator Hopson, good or bad time to think about new ways of funding higher education?
It's always a good time to look at new ways of funding. The concern I have is what I said earlier. I'm just not really in favor of earmarking funds for any particular program in Mississippi. I know we've tried that in some other areas, and the problem that you get when you earmark funds is when there's a shortage or there's some kind of decline in that earmark, you're suddenly scrambling around trying to find dollars to fund programs that are necessary, like universities and colleges. So, I'd rather put all the money that we get, or most of the money that we get in the state, into our general fund, and then look at each agency and look at each entity of the government and decide, is this something we need to fund this year, or do we hold off, or do we cut, or do we increase? I just think that's a better way of running government.
We've got an email question here from Yvonne in Vicksburg. The number of superintendents in Mississippi who are paid in the hundreds of thousands, why do you think we need them? Our object should be to spend the budget for education, not administrators. I think, she adds, our teachers are grossly underpaid in her opinion. I think she's touching on K through 12 education, but this is something that also reaches into the university, isn't it? How do you look at the administration while maintaining the focus on the classroom, Senator?
Well, let me address the number of superintendents. I know there's been some discussion about a study committee being put together for the off-season. In other words, when we get out of the legislature this year, and looking at maybe some consolidation of school districts, or trying to at least reduce the number of school districts. It does concern me greatly that we'd be paying exorbitant salaries to superintendents that have very small numbers of students in their districts. And that's a way we can probably cut some money. When you talk about it from a universities and colleges standpoint, sure, I'd love to find a way to cut some money and consolidate some efforts. The problem that you have is what Representative Buck and I have already talked about. You start cutting out universities and colleges and consolidating them, and the concern is you may be cutting out students from attending those universities and colleges. So, we have to be real careful about cutting too many programs when access is limited already in some ways. I'd be hesitant. I'd like to see us cut some programs that are duplicative, but I'd be concerned about cutting universities or consolidating universities at this point.
It's a pretty touchy issue, isn't it, Representative?
It is, but it's an issue that we're going to have to face at some point. We have 150 plus school districts, and each one of those school districts has to have a superintendent. In some counties you have as many as 4, maybe 5 school districts in one county. It really is something that we need to look at and try to see if we can't find some solution. I, for one, would be supportive of some effort to try to look at consolidation. I think it's a very prudent approach to trying to deal with our expenses as it relates to K through 12. I know that's not popular with everybody. It won't fit for everybody. So we'll have to take that in consideration. Every community can't make that transition as easy as others. And so we have to look at all of those kinds of options. I think we have to keep the door open. There's a provision in one of our bills, matter of fact, that says that we need to even invest in charter schools. I'm opposed to that. I think with the money that we have right now that is so limited, we can't afford to pay for what we have. And so to bring on another system of schools online by way of charter schools is simply depleting the funds even more, dividing them even more. So we have to be very careful. I think there's some room to do some things. I like the accountability thing that we're doing with Children's First Act. But, we really have to look at some of the physical things that we have as it relates to what it's costing us to run all of these school districts in a state this small.
We've got another caller, Minnie from Canton. Go ahead with your question.
My question?
Yes, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. My question concerns the monies that were supposedly to be generated from the casino industry, the gambling industry, that was to 15 years ago now was to help out with education and raising money for schools and what have you. We don't hear anything about those funds. Where are those funds, and how do they fit in?
Thanks for the call, Minnie. Senator, where do some of those funds go?
Well, we get lots of money from the casinos, and the casinos not only help fund the state budget significantly, but they also fund the local municipalities where they're located pretty significantly. And I know, for instance, we've got casinos in my district in Vicksburg, Warren County, and there are a lot of the casino tax revenues that go directly to the schools there in Warren County. So yeah, they're helping out. You just don't hear about it a lot, but those monies I know are helping to fund education, and if nothing else, they're being put into the general fund, and then we turn around and allocate those monies to education. So they are helping out.
Representative Buck, how does this casino funding play into this issue?
Well, just as the senator has indicated, the money goes into our general fund. If we did not have the dollars that we get from the casinos to put into our general funds, we'd be in much worse shape than we are now. And, of course, if you live in Tunica and some of these other areas where the casinos exist, you know the direct impact it has on your taxes and in terms of what you have to pay, because it gives you almost you get a pretty good break as it relates to local taxes when you live in one of those areas directly located where the casinos are directly located. So it helps. A lot of people had the, I guess, misconception, and it may have been because of the way it was expressed when they were doing the legislation for the casinos, that this money would go directly to and only to education. That never was the case. It always, I think, was part of the plan to put it in the general fund, and as a result of that, be able to go and be streamed towards the educational institutions that we have.
I wanted to also touch on something that's been going on right now that touches on universities. The Mississippi University for Women is in the process of changing its name. Some people are arguing the current name hinders recruitment and growth. The legislature, if I'm understanding, must approve the change. Senator Hopson, what are your thoughts about changing the name, maybe why or why it's not needed?
I have had several people express concern about the name change, but my position is going to be whatever the study committee that has been designated to look into that, whatever they decide, that's what I'll go with. And I'm sure I'll get people that have opinions on every side. Some will want to keep it as it is. Some will want to change it to one of the names that's under consideration as opposed to the one that's being offered. At this point, my intention is to go with whatever the committee decides that they want to do.
Representative Buck, what are your thoughts on the Mississippi University for Women name change?
Well, we've all been approached, and I in particular have been approached about this, and of course we've had some dialogue with some of the key players in this debate and this discussion. It is my plan during the summer, the off season, to at least have some hearings to try to discuss this matter in a little bit more detail. But it will boil down to what the locals want, what the people that directly are impacted with this issue, meaning the alumni and of course the people, administrators of the school. They'll have to come to some kind of conclusion on this, but we'll be glad to facilitate some kind of a hearing to try to get some idea so that our members can be educated as to what the issues are and what the real problems are, and we won't have to deal with the the speculation and things of this nature. We'll know exactly what's on the table, and we'll be able to make an informed decision once, because we may be faced with some legislation being offered by one of the members, especially one of the members from that local area, from that area.
I just wanted to touch on something. We've just got a minute left, but how soon could we be seeing the stimulus dollars coming into the higher education system?
Well, it's really hard to say. I think some of the stimulus dollars are coming down now. I did get a report from IHL recently as we were prepared to have a hearing, and it had to be canceled because of a long session that we had. But I anticipate having that hearing and getting more information about that. I think some of the dollars are already prepared to be flowing, and it's just a matter of the universities and IHL board making some determinations as to how that money will be used. But I think some of the money is already ready to be used and put into effect.
And Senator Hopson, how soon are you hoping, as Representative Buck mentioned, some of that money is already coming down? What are you looking at right now?
Well, the governor has, I think it's a few more weeks to decide what he's going to accept, and it may be less than that. It may be within a week or so, but he's got a short amount of time to determine what he's willing to accept and what he's not going to. And then I think the legislature has a certain time, and I think it's a few weeks that they've got to decide if they want to try to override the governor's decision. I expect that by the end of this legislative session or shortly thereafter, we should see some monies flowing in. One of the things this does is it provides money that monies that had been cut from programs like education. So I expect that we're going to be getting the money pretty quickly once the decisions have been made.
I just want to touch on something briefly. Chancellor Robert Kayat at University of Mississippi has announced his retirement. If I'm correct, you're an Ole Miss grad,
Correct.
Senator Hopson. What would you like to see in the next president?
if we could clone Robert Kayat, or if he's got a son that's about 45 years old that's going to administer the university just like him, I wish he had come forward. But I think a lot of us would love to have another Robert Kayat again. But I'm sure I've got full confidence in the IHL that they're going to do a tremendous job vetting candidates and picking somebody that's going to be a great fit for the University of Mississippi. And look forward to working with them and with the new chancellor.
And Representative Buck, what do we need at the University of Mississippi for a chancellor?
Well, I would agree. We've got some great presidents in all of our universities. I've had the opportunity to sit down and listen and talk with many of them, and I'm very impressed with what they bring to the table. Their primary concern is trying to provide an environment that is ideal for our students to be able to compete in this global society that we now live in. And I think that the University of Mississippi is looking for the same thing that Mississippi State, Valley, and all the rest of our universities are looking for. That's great leaders who understand the state of Mississippi, understand our people, and is prepared to move us into the next level when it comes to education.
I think we'll leave it at that for tonight. That's all the time we have. I'd like to thank our guests, Senator Briggs Hopson and Representative Kelvin Buck. We also thank you for joining our discussion tonight. We invite you to tune in next week at 7 for Quorum. Also, tonight's program will be available for viewing on our website beginning tomorrow. That address is mpbonline.org. I'm Stephen Caranda. Good night.